Hi, thank you for joining us today. My name is Mark Hodgson, and we're here with Harry Saunders, who liberated the camps over there in Germany. He has a speech he'd like to read, so if you'd please turn the camera over to him.
50 years ago, I was here with 23 men and our platoon leader, Sergeant Koziak from Chicago, Illinois. Our 1st platoon of the 41st Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron, 11th Armored Division, General Patton's 3rd Army, liberated Mauthausen Death Camp on May 5, 1945. 1,800 Germans surrendered that day 50 years ago, and we marched them down the road. It is a day I will never forget. A celebration by prisoners freed from this Nazi concentration camp is etched into Sergeant Harry Saunders' brain. It's a memory I will carry to my grave. The inmates hugged and kissed American soldiers. Though sallow and weak from starvation, they managed to toss several soldiers into the air. Liberated at last from the death camp, the prisoners laughed and cried. It was like God himself had come to rescue them. It was something you never forget. The intended victims of the Nazi death camp went wild with joy as the American soldiers arrived. They ripped the German eagle and swastika from the roof of the front gate. Living skeletons in striped uniforms ran through the gate of the enclosed camp and scattered like dust across the countryside. It was almost like a dream. It was so exciting. It made us proud to be Americans, to have liberated these people. There were over 100,000 Jews and other people killed at Mauthausen and its sub-camps during the 7 years of its existence. When you've been through what I went through and saw what I've seen and the horrors of the concentration camps, it's something you can never forget as long as you live, something you can't forgive. After we opened the doors of Mauthausen and saw the horror we saw, I knew why I was over there fighting the war for the U.S. Army. We were invited over to Mauthausen death camp by the French survivors. We liberated the camp, and they treated us very, very well. And so anyway, I was there when I was a 23-year-old soldier, and we were the first ones to enter the Mauthausen concentration camp. And the inmates, skin and bones, just went wild. And so anyway, I was 23 when we liberated the camp, and I went back for the 50th celebration. So of course now I'm 73 years old. And don't ever let anybody tell you the Holocaust didn't happen. I saw it with my own eyes. I saw dead bodies, skin and bones, stacked up like cordwood. I was in the crematorium where they tried to burn up the bodies. There was parts of humans in there, and most of these people laying around were just naked. And it was so cruel, and it was such a shock that us Americans got very, very mad at what we saw. And we had no idea that this was what was going to happen. And the way this happened, we were deep in Austria at Linz, Austria, and my platoon in armored cars and jeeps were patrolling along the Danube River. And all of a sudden, down the road came a white Red Cross car, painted white with Red Cross on the hood and Red Cross flags flying on the fenders. And there was a representative driving the car from Switzerland, a Red Cross representative. In the back seat were two high-ranking German officers. They were looking for the Americans because they wanted to surrender the camp to the Americans because the Russians were coming from the east. And they thought that they would get a lot better treatment from the Americans. And so we went back in behind enemy lines, and it just happened to be that we had 2 first lieutenants killed by Germans hiding in the bushes with bazookas. In a 3-week period, we had 2 first lieutenants that were killed, and Sergeant Koziak was in charge of our platoon. And so with 23 men, they surrendered, and we marched them down the road. Now, if there's any questions, I could answer, probably.
Could you tell me a little bit about yourself before you went into the Army?
Well, I was born in Chicago, Illinois on January 18th, 1922. And I moved to Seattle, Washington in 1937, and I entered the service October 27th, 1942 at Fort Lewis, Washington. I was sent to Camp Polk, Louisiana for basic training and assigned to the 11th Armored Division. I was sent to Fort Knox, Kentucky for training as a radio operator. And by the way, that's probably the least of what my jobs was in combat. We used voice radio. I learned to send and receive messages in the International Morse code, and when we got into combat, we used voice radio. We didn't use any code messages at all. So anyway, after training at Fort Knox, sent back to Camp Polk, Louisiana, and we went on maneuvers in Louisiana and Texas. And then we were shipped to Camp Barkley, Texas, where the division reorganized and we became Troop D, 41st Cavalry Recon Squadron, mechanized. We were sent to Camp Ibis in California for desert training. And after that, we were sent to Camp Cook, California. Then the division was ordered to report to Camp Kilmer, New Jersey. We boarded troop ships and landed in Southampton, England. Later over to Cherbourg, France, and into combat in late December and January 1945 with General Patton's Third Army. We relieved some of the 101st Airborne at Bastogne, Belgium during the Battle of the Bulge. From there, we spearheaded into Luxembourg, Germany, Czechoslovakia, and Austria. We spearheaded across Germany as the enemy retreated. And I'll let you have a chance to say something. I could talk all day about this.
Did you have a girlfriend? Did you have a family before you went in?
Oh yes, I've been going steady with a girl in high school, and we met in a roller skating rink, and we were both very good roller skaters. Instead of going dancing, we went roller skating every Saturday night, and I'd buy her a double or a triple gardenia, and it's like we were going to a dance, only we skated all the waltzes and had a great time. Anyway, when I got my notice to report to the service, we decided to get married. So I was 20 and my wife was 17, and when she came down to visit me in Camp Barkley, Texas, she went home pregnant, and I have one son, Greg Saunders, who was going to be 51 years old in June, and so we've had a wonderful life together. We've been married going on 53 years, and my son is a principal up at Clallam Bay, Washington, and that's about it.
I'd expect it to be pretty lonely, and being away from your wife when you left. Would you say letters from her?
Oh, yes. It was a real sad time. In fact, I'd never been away from home in my life, and I used to just about cry myself to sleep at night. I was on a troop train to go to Louisiana for basic training for 5 days, or 5 or 6 days and 5 nights, and I actually cried myself to sleep at night. We just got married. We were deeply in love, and it was a real tough time. And anyway, and when Pearl Harbor happened, I was 19 years old, and then January of the next year, in 1942, I was 20, and then that fall I was drafted, and I spent around 3 years in the service and about 12 months overseas in combat. And I used to pray to get home to my wife and son, and when I was over there in combat, I was in reconnaissance. We always had to take the lead. And I used to pray to stay alive from one day to the next when I was over there fighting. And our 3rd platoon was ambushed, and most of the men were killed. I saw death all around me, and it was scary as could be. But we were well trained, and we gave them everything. We gave them heck whenever we could. I might mention the fact that on April 1st, 1945, we're coming into a little German town. I was in the armored car as the gunner for Sergeant Koziak, who was the car commander. And we were in the last vehicle as we entered the town on a side road. Well, we looked behind us, and down the road comes 5 German half-tracks loaded with Germans. They were retreating, and somehow we got ahead of them. Well, Sergeant Koziak said he went ahead to direct the platoon, and he left me there in the turret. So I cranked the turret around, and I start shooting my 5th caliber machine gun, And every fifth round was a tracer, and I took these Germans by complete surprise. The first half-track stopped, and the second vehicle ran into the rear end of the first one, and the Krauts were running in all directions. I fired my 50-caliber machine gun until the gun jammed, and then I loaded the 37-millimeter gun on my armored car and shot a few rounds with that. And this was on April 1st, and on May 8th, the war ended in Europe, and my sergeant or whoever was in charge, they wrote this thing up, and I got a citation. I got the Silver Star for gallantry in action. I've been very proud of that, so that's another story of mine. Yes.
Could you describe to me the last half hour before you actually liberated the camp? Could you tell me the smells and some of the sights and how you felt?
Well, yeah, the smell was pretty bad. It was a sweet, kind of a sweet, sickening smell. And of course, these poor inmates were just skin and bones, the ones that were alive. And it was a horrible smell. And of course, we got into the crematorium, we got into the gas chamber where they put people to death, and we heard so many horrible stories. And I also have read a few books on the Mauthausen concentration camp. Of course, the inmates, they hugged and kissed us. And when we were over there for a 50-year celebration, just last week we got home, we were treated royally because the French survivors invited us over there, 6 GIs and their wives, and we were the liberators, and they still hugged us and kissed us and said, if it wasn't for you, we never would have been here. We wouldn't be alive today if it wasn't for you Americans coming to free us. And one lady I remember distinctly, she said, you came too late. She said, this morning they killed 600 people and one of them was my husband. So that was really a sad thing that she told us. And but anyway, we went to all these ceremonies at all the different camps that were liberated, and Mauthausen being the main camp, it's still pretty much intact, and there's a museum there, and there's the crematoriums. You can walk through there and you can see all this stuff, and we were in there with all the survivors from all the various countries. And there was speeches made by the president of Austria and the ambassador of the United States to Austria, and all the ambassadors of all the countries that had inmates in Mauthausen. And it was kind of a 5-day celebration, and they kept us extremely busy. We had to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and had breakfast at 7:15, in the bus at 8 o'clock, and we went to all these camps that had been there. We saw the tunnels in the rock, and we saw where the Germans with slave labor, made the people work on Messerschmitt parts for German airplanes, and also in one camp where they had tunnels into the rock, where they were testing the V-2 rockets that were sent over to England, and of course the horror stories were unbelievable. Oh, there's another story where when in the infirmary where the sick people were put to death, and they skinned anybody that had tattoos that were attractive. They'd skin them, and they made lampshades with the skin of some of these inmates, and it was something that you just can't forgive. You can't imagine how horrible it was, and of course, Mauthausen was the last camp to be liberated because it was just three days before the war ended. Is there anything else you want to talk about, or?
Well, I'd just like to say that it's really been an honor being able to interview you, and I feel that you've done so much for them and for us. And I'd really like to thank you, and thank you for joining us.
Okay, great. I'm glad to be here.